If you are prepared to step fully into the person you recognize you were meant to become, I have created the second life as a complete path grounded in timeless principles of success, designed to help you create lasting transformation and begin building greater wealth, stronger health, deeper relationships, inner stability, and a life that genuinely reflects your highest potential. Click the first link in the description and become who you were meant to be. There exists a level of power that cannot be reached in isolation. Regardless of how disciplined, focused, or driven an individual may be, he can outwork those around him, extend his effort, and push beyond limits. Yet, eventually he encounters it, an invisible ceiling that effort alone cannot penetrate. At first, this limitation is not recognized. It is interpreted as a need for more time, more skill, or greater consistency. In response, the individual intensifies his effort. He isolates further. He relies more heavily on himself. The individual intensifies his effort. He isolates further. He relies more heavily on himself. For a period, this appears effective, until progress begins to slow. At that stage, frustration emerges. The effort remains, the discipline remains, yet the results no longer expand proportionately. It creates the sense that something is missing, though it is not immediately visible. Most respond by attempting to outwork the limitation, by increasing effort, extending hours, and applying more pressure. However, this approach has a boundary. The constraint is not effort. The constraint is isolation. Consider the possibility that the increasing difficulty has little to do with capability. Consider that progress has reached a stage where a different form of leverage is required, not additional effort, but expanded input. There exists a principle that explains why certain individuals advance more rapidly, identify opportunities earlier, and produce results that seem disproportionate to their effort. It is not luck. It is not timing. It is alignment. When the right minds converge with shared direction, a shift occurs. Thought becomes sharper. Decisions gain clarity. Progress begins to compound rather than thought becomes sharper. Decisions gain clarity. Progress begins to compound rather than stall. The strongest moments of thinking rarely occur in isolation. They emerge through exposure, through interaction with other perspectives. When minds connect with purpose, they do not merely combine ideas, they expand them. One idea leads to another. One insight creates a new direction. The individual begins to operate beyond personal limitation. Yet many never experience this fully. They remain within environments of comfort rather than growth, circles where thinking, behavior, and perception remain uniform. This creates containment. The individuals surrounding a person do more than influence environment. They shape identity. They define what appears possible, what is pursued, and what is tolerated. Over time, this influence becomes the framework within which the individual operates. However, not every connection produces strength. Some dilute focus, some create distraction, some redirect effort without awareness. Without intentional selection, one may be surrounded yet remain stagnant. True alignment is not accidental. It is structured through shared purpose, shared standards, and shared direction. When these elements are present, the effect becomes unmistakable. Thinking expands. Action sharpens, progress accelerates, not through increased effort, but through improved operation. This is where the fundamental shift occurs. The individual no longer depends solely on his own perspective. He begins to perceive what was previously unseen, and decisions become clearer, more precise, and more effective. If a ceiling has been reached, if effort no longer produces expected results, the solution is not necessarily been reached. If effort no longer produces expected results, the solution is not necessarily greater intensity. The next level of growth does not emerge from isolation. It emerges through connection, through building something collectively that cannot be created alone. There comes a stage in every individual's development where effort alone ceases to generate equal return. Early progress appears linear. Actions produce visible outcomes. This reinforces the belief that continued effort ensures continued advancement. Yet eventually, the pattern shifts. Effort remains constant, or even increases, yet results begin to slow. The individual senses this before understanding it. A subtle heaviness appears. Movement feels less direct. Without identifying the cause, he assumes the solution lies in doing more. This is where misjudgment begins. The limitation is not effort, it is isolation. The mind, when operating alone, is confined to its own experience. It draws only from what it has already seen, learned, and considered. Initially, this is sufficient. Over time, however, patterns repeat. Ideas recycle. Conclusions reappear in altered forms. The individual believes he is thinking deeply, yet often he is thinking within. The individual believes he is thinking deeply, yet often he is thinking within a closed loop. This loop is difficult to recognize from within. It feels like progress, but produces diminishing expansion. This is the invisible limit. It does not stop action, it reduces its effectiveness. In response, most intensify effort. They work long. In response, most intensify effort. They work longer, push harder, and isolate further. Believing focus alone will break resistance. Temporary improvement may occur, but the condition returns. Progress stalls. Frustration increases. This frustration is often misinterpreted as lack of ability. Yet in most cases, ability is not the issue. The individual has simply reached the limit of what his mind can generate independently. History repeatedly demonstrates this pattern. Capable individuals confined not by effort but by lack of expansion. Others may observe the shift. They see continued activity without equivalent advancement. They interpret it as loss of momentum. In reality, it is the effect of isolation. Expansion cannot occur within fixed boundaries. Those boundaries must be extended. Recognition of this is critical. Once the individual understands that limitation lies not in effort but in lack of exposure, a transition begins. He no longer assumes all solutions must originate internally. He begins to seek expansion intentionally. With this shift, thinking changes. Ideas diversify. Decisions become clearer. Not because new ability has been created, but because new input has been introduced. This marks the beginning of true advancement, not through effort alone, but through expanded reach of thought. Isolation, while appearing as strength, becomes limitation, not through effort alone, but through expanded reach of thought. Isolation, while appearing as strength, becomes limitation. Effort, while necessary, is insufficient alone. Thinking, when confined, repeats rather than evolves. The individual who understands this does not abandon effort. He refines and expands it. He refines and expands it. Let him recognize this stage when it appears. Let him not respond with increased isolation. Let him seek expansion deliberately. For through expansion, progress resumes. I do not rely solely on my own thinking. I expand beyond myself, and through that expansion, I move beyond every limit I once believed was fixed. As awareness develops, the individual becomes open to shared thought. He recognizes that interaction between minds produces outcomes unattainable alone. Thought is no longer static. It is refined, challenged, and extended. This is not simple exchange. It is multiplication. Ideas evolve through interaction. Solutions emerge more clearly. Direction becomes defined. Others observe this shift as increased capability, yet it is the result of expanded perspective. True expansion requires variation, not agreement. Comfort does not produce growth. Comfort does not produce growth. Contrast does. Through differing perspectives, thought develops. Many breakthroughs occur not through solitary effort, but through interaction. The individual who engages with strong minds gains access to broader insight. His progress reflects this difference. However, engagement must be intentional. Not all associations create value. The individual must align with those who bring clarity, direction, and expansion. Selection determines outcome. From this foundation emerges a higher principle, the mastermind. This is not merely collaboration, it is the coordinated union of minds operating in harmony toward a defined purpose. When properly formed, it creates a force greater than any individual contribution. This force is not accidental. It requires alignment, purpose, and harmony. When present, ideas evolve rapidly, decisions sharpen, and outcomes accelerate. Historical examples repeatedly demonstrate this principle. Individuals who achieve significantly more through coordinated effort than alone. Within such alignment, trust develops, openness increases, thought flows freely. The alliance becomes a source of strength, not occasional support. The individual operating within this structure no longer functions at the same level. Effort gains leverage, thinking gains reach, Results reflect multiplied input. Yet selection remains critical. Not all associations elevate, some restrict. Alignment must be chosen deliberately, based on growth, not comfort. The individual must continuously evaluate, do these connections expand thinking, strengthen direction, and elevate standards? If not, adjustment is required. Growth demands proper environment. Once a true alliance is formed and maintained, acceleration follows. Decisions become faster, not through haste, but through clarity. Action becomes precise. Progress becomes efficient. This efficiency compounds over time. Fewer errors, less wasted effort, greater consistency. The individual advances further with the same or even reduced strain. Eventually, integration occurs. The individual no longer feels isolated in thought or effort. He operates within a collective intelligence. His results reflect this shift. At this stage, responsibility increases. The alliance must be maintained, harmony preserved, contribution sustained. Harmony preserved, contribution sustained. The individual is both beneficiary and contributor. He no longer measures potential by individual capacity, but by collective strength. Limitations dissolve. Expansion continues. I unite my thinking with aligned minds. Through shared purpose and coordinated effort, I move beyond all previous limits. This is the culmination of the principle. True advancement is rarely the result of isolated effort. It is the outcome of aligned, sustained, and purposeful collaboration. And so, if you are ready to become who you know you were meant to be, I have created the second life, a complete path built upon timeless success principles to help you achieve lasting transformation across every dimension of your life. Beyond this point, the individual begins to recognize a subtle but decisive distinction. There is a difference between participation and contribution. Many can enter an environment of growth, but few actively strengthen it. True advancement requires more than presence. It requires deliberate input. The man who continues to evolve within such an alliance does not remain passive. He refines his ability to think clearly, to communicate precisely, and to contribute meaningfully. He understands that the strength of the collective depends, in part, on the quality he brings into it. And so his standard rises, not out of obligation, but out of awareness. He begins to observe his own thinking more carefully. He questions assumptions more rigorously. He develops the discipline to separate impulse from insight. This internal refinement allows him to engage with others at a higher level. His contributions become more structured, more valuable, more effective. As this process continues, something else begins to form: discernment. The ability to recognize not only strong ideas, but the direction in which those ideas should be applied. Many individuals can generate thought, fewer can direct it with precision. Within a strong alliance, this distinction becomes clear. The individual learns when to speak and when to listen, when to challenge and when to support, when to introduce a new perspective and when to refine an existing one. This balance is not instinctive at first. It is developed through consistent interaction, through observation, and through intention. Over time, his presence within the alliance becomes increasingly impactful. He is no longer simply benefiting from the structure. He is helping to sustain and elevate it. Others begin to recognize this, not through declaration, but through effect. His ideas carry weight. His contributions influence direction. His thinking creates movement. At this stage, another shift occurs. The individual no longer seeks validation for his ideas. He seeks refinement. His focus is no longer on being correct, but on being effective. This distinction changes how he engages. It removes defensiveness and replaces it with openness. And in that openness, growth accelerates further. Because the moment the need to protect an idea disappears, the ability to improve it increases. The individual becomes adaptable without losing direction, flexible without losing standard. This is where maturity within the process becomes visible. Not in how much one speaks, but in how one contributes. Not in how strongly one holds an idea, but in how effectively it can be developed. As the alliance continues to operate, patterns begin to emerge. Certain approaches consistently produce results. Certain ways of thinking consistently lead to clarity. The individual begins to internalize these patterns. They become part of how he operates, even outside the alliance itself. This is where true independence returns, but in a different form. Not the independence of isolation, but the independence of expanded capability. The individual can now operate alone when necessary, yet he no longer thinks alone. The influence of aligned minds remains present in how he analyzes, decides, and acts. Others will notice that his consistency has improved, that his decisions no longer fluctuate, that his direction remains stable even in changing conditions. This is not rigidity, it is alignment carried forward. And with this stability comes another advantage: resilience. Challenges no longer disrupt him in the same way. Setbacks do not create the same uncertainty. Because his thinking is no longer dependent on a single perspective, he adapts more quickly. He recalibrates more effectively. This does not eliminate difficulty. It changes how difficulty is handled. The individual no longer reacts, he responds. And in that response, he maintains progress. Eventually, a final realization begins to take form. Growth is no longer something he pursues. Growth is no longer something he pursues. It becomes something he sustains. It is no longer dependent on motivation, circumstance, or temporary focus. It is built into his structure, into his environment, into his associations. At this level, progress is no longer forced. It is maintained through alignment, contribution, and continuous expansion. The individual does not need to restart each time he encounters resistance. He moves through it with established support and refined thinking. This is where long-term advancement is secured, not through intensity alone, but through continuity, not through isolated effort, but through sustained structure. And so the process completes its cycle, not as an end, but as a new standard. The individual who once relied solely on himself now operates within a system that multiplies his capacity. He has not lost independence, he has expanded it. Let him then remain aware of this position. Let him continue to contribute. Let him continue to contribute. Let him continue to align, continue to refine. For it is through this continuation that growth does not fade, but strengthens over time. I do not merely seek progress, I sustain it. Through disciplined thought, aligned association, and continuous contribution, I maintain expansion as a constant state. From this stage forward, the individual begins to understand that sustainability is not achieved by intensity, but by structure. What was once driven by bursts of motivation is now supported by systems that operate nizavissima of mood or circumstance. He no longer relies on feeling ready. He relies on what has been built. This introduces a new level of discipline, one that is quieter but far more stable. It is not expressed through visible effort alone, but through consistency of execution. The individual no longer negotiates with distraction in the same way. His standards have become internalized. What once required conscious control now operates with minimal resistance. As this stability develops, attention shifts toward precision. It is no longer enough to act. The quality of action becomes central. Small adjustments begin to produce noticeable differences. The individual becomes aware that refinement, even in minor areas, compounds over time into significant advantage. He studies out these outcomes more carefully. He evaluates not only what worked, why it worked. This level of observation sharpens judgment. Decisions are no longer based on assumption or habit, but on pattern recognition built through experience and reflection. At this point, time itself is perceived differently. It is no longer something to be managed reactively, but allocated intentionally. The individual begins to recognize that where time is invested determines the direction of growth. Activities are no longer chosen based on urgency alone, but on long-term impact. This creates separation. Many remain occupied, few remain directed. The individual who understands this distinction reduces what is unnecessary. He eliminates what does not contribute, not abruptly, but deliberately. Over time, this creates focus. With increased focus comes increased capacity. Energy is no longer scattered. It is concentrated, and concentrated effort produces deeper results. The individual is able to engage more fully with fewer objectives, and in doing so, achieves a level of depth that cannot be reached through divided attention. Others may interpret this as restraint or even limitation. In reality, it is selection. The individual is no longer attempting to pursue everything. He is advancing through what matters most. This clarity simplifies decision-making. It removes internal conflict. As this process continues, identity itself becomes more defined. The individual is no longer experimenting with direction. He operates with a clear sense of alignment between what he does and what he intends to build. This alignment reduces friction. Actions feel connected rather than fragmented. There is also a shift in how progress is measured. External validation becomes less influential. The individual no longer depends on immediate recognition to confirm direction. He evaluates progress through internal standards, through consistency, clarity, and alignment with long-term objectives. This does not remove ambition, it refines it. The desire to advance remains, but it is no longer driven by comparison. It is driven by expansion, by the continuous improvement of capacity, understanding, and execution. At this level, patience becomes an advantage, not passive waiting, but controlled progression. The individual understands that certain outcomes require time to develop. Rather than forcing results prematurely, he maintains direction and allows accumulation to work in his favor. This creates a form of confidence that is not easily shaken. It is not based on immediate success, but on trust in process. The individual knows that if structure is maintained, results will follow. This removes urgency without reducing commitment. Another distinction becomes clear: the difference between motion and progress. Many remain active, yet do not advance. The individual who has reached this stage evaluates movement carefully. He ensures that action leads somewhere, that effort produces direction, not just activity. This awareness prevents drift. It keeps progress intentional. Even when adjustments are required, they are made with clarity rather than reaction. Over time, this produces a form of quiet momentum. There are no sudden spikes, no dramatic shifts, only steady, continuous advancement. This momentum is difficult to disrupt because it is not dependent on external factors. It is maintained internally through structure and discipline. Others may not immediately recognize this phase. It lacks visible intensity. It does not seek attention, yet its results become evident over time. The individual continues to move forward while others fluctuate. He remains stable while others restart. This is where separation becomes undeniable, not through speed alone, but through consistency. The individual who sustains direction eventually surpasses those who rely on temporary effort. And within this consistency, another realization emerges: there is always another level of refinement. Growth does not conclude, it evolves. Each stage reveals new areas for improvement, new opportunities for expansion, new standards to reach. The individual no longer seeks completion. He commits to progression. This removes the illusion of arrival and replaces it with continuous development. Let him then remain engaged in this process. Let him continue to refine structure, to sharpen focus, to direct effort with intention. For it is through this sustained discipline that advancement becomes not an event, but a condition. I do not depend on intensity to move forward. I build structure, I maintain direction, and through consistent refinement, I ensure that my progress continues without interruption. As progression continues, the individual begins to recognize a deeper layer of control. Attention itself becomes the primary asset. Not time, not effort, but the ability to direct focus without fragmentation. Where attention goes, development follows. Most never fully master this. Their focus shifts constantly, pulled by urgency, distraction, or external noise. But the individual who has reached this stage treats attention with precision. He does not allow it to be claimed. He assigns it. This single shift changes the quality of everything he produces. With controlled attention comes clarity of perception. Situations are no longer viewed at surface level. He begins to see structure beneath appearance, cause behind effect, pattern behind outcome. This allows him to anticipate rather than react. Decisions, as a result, become less frequent, but more accurate. He does not rush to respond to every opportunity or obstacle. He evaluates, he filters. He acts only when alignment is more accurate. He does not rush to respond to every opportunity or obstacle. He evaluates, he filters. He acts only when alignment is present. This restraint is not hesitation, it is discipline applied to choice. There is also a noticeable reduction in internal noise. Doubt, once persistent, loses influence, not because uncertainty disappears, but because it is no longer given authority. The individual has developed the ability to move forward without needing absolute certainty. This creates momentum of a different kind, quiet, controlled, and deliberate. He is no longer pulled forward by urgency or pushed by pressure. He moves because direction has been established and maintained. Moves because direction has been established and maintained. At this level, environment becomes even more intentional. Not only the people he engages with, but the information he consumes, the conversations he entertains, and the inputs he allows into his thinking. Everything is evaluated based on its effect. If it strengthens clarity, it is kept. If it introduces confusion, it is removed. Over time, this creates a mental environment that supports precision rather than distraction. Others may find this level of selectivity extreme. In reality, it is necessary, because as capacity increases, so does responsibility. The individual is no longer operating at a level where scattered input can be afforded. He also begins to recognize the compounding nature of decisions. A single choice repeated over time defines direction. Small deviations, left unchecked, create significant divergence. This awareness reinforces discipline, not as restriction, but as protection of trajectory. With this comes a heightened sense of ownership. The individual no longer attributes outcomes to circumstance. He understands that direction is shaped by decisions, and decisions are shaped by standards. This realization eliminates excuses without creating pressure. It replaces reaction with responses, and decisions are shaped by standards. This realization eliminates excuses without creating pressure. It replaces reaction with responsibility. Every outcome becomes information, something to be analyzed, adjusted, and improved upon. At this stage, learning itself changes form. It is no longer passive consumption. It becomes active integration. The individual does not gather information for accumulation, but for application. What is learned is tested, refined, and incorporated into action. This shortens the gap between knowledge and execution. Ideas are no longer stored, they are utilized, and through utilization they evolve into capability. There is also a growing awareness of timing. Not everything must be pursued immediately. The individual begins to sense when to act and when to wait. This is not hesitation, it is strategic patience. Acting at the right moment often produces greater results than acting quickly. This control over timing further increases efficiency, often produces greater results than acting quickly. This control over timing further increases efficiency. Effort is no longer wasted on misaligned action. Energy is applied where it has the greatest effect. As this continues, the individual develops a form of stability that is difficult to disrupt. External conditions may change, but internal direction remains consistent. He adjusts without losing alignment. He adapts without losing structure. Others begin to rely on this stability. They recognize that he does not shift unpredictably, that his decisions are grounded, that his direction is clear. This creates trust, not through words, but through repeated demonstration. With trust comes influence, not forced, not declared, but earned through consistency. The individual does not seek to lead, yet others begin to follow his direction. Because clarity attracts alignment, this introduces another responsibility, the need to remain grounded. Influence, if not managed, because clarity attracts alignment, this introduces another responsibility, the need to remain grounded. Influence, if not managed, can distort judgment. The individual must continue to operate within the same principles that created his progress. He must not substitute attention with assumption, nor discipline with confidence. This is where many begin to decline, not through failure, but through neglect of fundamentals. The individual who continues to advance does the opposite. He returns to the core principles regularly. He reinforces them. He ensures that growth remains stable. Over time, this creates something rare, predictable progress. Not predictable in exact outcome, but in direction. The individual knows that if structure is maintained, if attention is controlled, if standards are upheld, advancement will continue. There is no longer a question of whether progress will occur, only how far it will extend. And within this certainty, a final refinement takes place, only how far it will extend. And within this certainty, a final refinement takes place. The individual no longer seeks to accelerate endlessly. He seeks to sustain indefinitely. Speed becomes secondary to continuity. because he understands that true advantage is not gained by moving quickly for a short time, but by continuing when others stop. Let him then preserve this level of awareness. Let him guard his attention. Let him maintain his standards. Let him act with precision and patience. For it is through this level of control that act with precision and patience. For it is through this level of control that progress is no longer dependent on circumstance, but governed by intention. I direct my attention with discipline. I act with clarity and precision. And through sustained control of thought and action, I continue to advance with consistency and purpose.